Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Tom and Brock. We're going to talk some Guild Wars 2 today. We want to do a little expansion speculation series, and we're going to kind of go through all the parts of what we think are going to come with these new mini expansions. And today, we're going to start with a big one, classes and elite specializations. And Brock, I don't know if you remember from the blog post, but there seemed to be some absences in regards to elite specializations, and that caused a lot of kind of uproar from the community. So, what were your thoughts when you saw that there wasn't really any concrete mention of elite specs or classes for that matter? Yeah, what was your initial take on that?
Yeah, your big what's missing here was PvP. My big what's missing here was what about elite specs? I mean, I love
Yeah.
elite specs. I think it's awesome that every every expansion so far has brought in a new way to play the game for all the
Mm.
characters or all the classes. And first one even adding in a brand new class with Revenant, but I I am worried that with the shift towards the little mini expansions or like shorter, more focused, more frequent expansions, that the elite specs may not be making a reappearance, and that's got me concerned, I'll say.
Yeah, well, I think the like you're saying, the worry is that a year is not enough time to
No.
build nine fully, crafted elite specs for every class, right?
Yep.
Because even if you go back, like Guild Wars has not been doing 2 year expansions. They've been doing taking
Right.
5 years to make an expansion kind of a thing. And so
Yeah.
they've had a lot of time to really put a lot of effort and thought into these elite specs that we've gotten the last couple
Uh,
expansions.
yeah, and they're diverse. Each new expansion has like 9 brand new flavors for how you play a class, introducing new mechanics, but still retaining like the identity of the class itself. And so that is I think that might be one of those things that is, for just like sheer scope of what you can realistically achieve in the time frame that they're trying to get expansions out. I don't think you can do 9 elite specs every expansion. I think it probably is, maybe, and that's why they were a little cagey or a little vague on details there. Like they don't want to commit to something when that's not going to happen, or if it is delivered that way with here's 9 new elite specs, that they're all copy paste, you know,
Hmm.
versions that no one's going to like anyway. Like that's, you want it to be a high quality thing, but I don't think you can do that in a short amount of time. So they're trying to hedge their bet, or they don't want to explain what the details are of that until we know.
And I'm on the record. I don't know how you feel about this, but I've heard WP and a few other people say, well, what if you just do one, two, three elite specs per expansion? But I don't think that's a good idea. And what if your class isn't getting it until the third expansion 3 years later? Like that seems, I don't know. I just don't see how that can work and how that would be fair to players. I don't know.
I, I
Thoughts on
guess
that?
my thought is like I'm I really like elite specs. I really like new ways to play the classes. I haven't even tried out all of the elite specs from End of Dragons, and that's a year old. I main a thief. I've been playing Spectre, and I've been playing like a, a mechanist a little bit. I've started to dip my toe into Willbender, but I multi-class more than you do in Guild Wars
Yeah.
2, so I'm more comfortable if my main class doesn't get its elite spec, like with the next expansion that's coming out, I'm sure that I will still have something to test out, to play around with. And if it doesn't wow me like one of the new elite specs or one of the older ones that I've grown accustomed to, then hey, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna keep playing that other thing. Like I said, I've played a little bit of
Yeah.
Willbender, but you know, Dragon Hunter is still my favorite flavor of Guardian.
Yeah.
It's weird, but like that's just I'm okay if the new thing doesn't cause a huge shift in the player base and everybody wants to play the new thing, I think as long as the balance is there, there's space for the old elite specs, and I think that that gives them a little bit more reasonable timeline to get a couple things really well developed, and then 2 years or 4 years down the line, a couple of expansions later maybe, then they have a new set to unveil, and that way everybody is kind of trickling out like new things about their class that they like over time.
Yeah, but what if you have to wait 3 years to get a thief elite spec? Like, wouldn't that feel bad? I mean, I understand what you're saying as a multi-classer. It's not as probably doesn't hit as hard because you like to play all different types of classes and different types of content, whereas me, who exclusively plays Ranger, pretty much,
Hmm.
I will dabble. Like, I did try Willbender. I think Willbender is really cool.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I have one of everything, but I just prefer the Ranger. I prefer Untamed, Soul Beast. Just kind of
Yeah,
doing all
that
those flavors.
flavor
Even Druid.
and that play style your is kind of in your wheelhouse, and I get that. I think I would I wouldn't feel bad if
Mm-hmm.
my main class didn't get its elite spec until the third
Mm.
expansion from now.
Okay.
I would feel bad if my main class, if a thief didn't get a new elite spec until say 6 years from now, and it was something that I did
Didn't
not
like.
want. Yeah,
I see.
then I'd
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
bad. If I waited all this time, I'm fine with waiting and anticipating and oh man, I can't wait to see what it's going to be. But
yeah.
when Daredevil
And then
came
it's a
out,
letdown.
right? Daredevil came out,
Yeah.
it was exactly what I wanted. Then Deadeye came out, exactly what I wanted. Spectre came out, didn't really want that. I had to kind of be won over by, oh, okay, I
Hmm.
can do all this utility cool stuff, and I kind of get it now. But man, if I'd had to wait, well, I almost did have to wait 6 years for a new elite spec on Spectre, and
Yeah.
didn't really like it for a while.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's almost like a little bit of a paradox because these new elite specs have given you multiple ways to play one character. So for me, who mains a ranger, if I want to play a support build, I can play druid, right? I don't have to switch off to a different character for a
Right.
different play style. You know what I mean? For the most part.
Yeah.
I kind of want to bring up this next question because we've obviously lumped in classes and elite specs together, in our talking points today.
Yeah.
And so I guess I want to ask you because I don't know if there's a real difference to me between elite specs and classes. It's almost like you're getting it's elite specs to me are almost like new classes
Hmm.
to an
Hmm.
extent. So do you draw a line between a hard line between elite specs and classes, or do you think there's any gray area that they're kind of the same thing but named different things in a way?
I feel like they're they are different at this point still. And
Okay.
that's kind of like the double-edged sword of, if Guild Wars does continue to release new elite specs, if you got 9 new elite specs with every expansion, even if they weren't coming out 2 years apart, um, if you think about a couple expansions from now, or once, if Guild Wars 2 is going to live on for years and years and years to come, once you get to the point where each class has 5, 6 elite specs, then besides that being like a balancing nightmare, then yeah, like you said, this one overarching class can be played 6 different ways. Can be played as a support build, as a healer build, as a DPS, as a tank. The and at that point, then you do really have to know what those little icons mean, because just
Mm,
because you're playing against a ranger doesn't mean that you have the right comp to be able to take on that ranger if you're playing PvP. If you're, it does kind of get into this nuance of like, yeah, we got 2 rangers on our team, 3 rangers, or we're gonna raid and we've got 10 rangers, but everyone is providing a different role. That's at that point you are really blurring the lines between just a class and an elite spec. Right now, I think they are distinct enough, but as there are more elite specs that enter the game, then it kind of becomes like, hey, yeah, you could almost view it as Guild Wars 2 has 27 classes, and then new elite specs are just going to broaden that pool.
Yeah, and so I guess I know they didn't mention classes, right? And so here's my pushback on them adding new classes. First of all, they have a nice symmetry to everything right now with
Yeah,
3 light, 3 medium, 3 heavy, right?
yeah.
And so the other thing is, if they, let's say they do come out with a new class, do they come out with all the elite specs for that class at once? Is this class the only class that gets elite specs going forward?
Mhm.
Like, how is that juggled? How does that work? And so I don't know, that's just the first things that come to mind
Yeah,
with a class.
I think it is easier for ArenaNet to make new elite specs, even as hard as that is, considering balance and that you want to keep the basic feel, the vibe of that class consistent. You don't want to like just make it something totally different. Oh, hey, here's an engineer who's all about illusions now. Like that doesn't make sense, you know.
Yeah.
And I think introducing elite specs into it has allowed them to kind of take the basic construct of the class and kind of stretch those edges into new areas a little bit. I don't think you can make a brand new class and say, "Hey, we're going to dump in 3 new elite specs into this class." They got away with it a little bit with the Revenant with Heart of Thorns, because at that point
Right.
every class was getting a new rework. But now, you know, if you introduce a new class right now, then yeah, it needs to come in with 3 elite specs as well. And I think if you focus all on that, then yeah, it's a definite sign none of the classes are getting any further elite specs at that point. And I don't know if you've saved yourself any work or if you've just made yourself like opened up to more criticism, because now you've
Right.
basically said, hey, these classes that you've loved and played for 10 years, they're at their final iteration. We're not doing anything to change them.
Yeah.
Now you got to go play the new stuff. And I think that that would send a bad message to the player base.
Yeah, and this is maybe the only way I think they could do it, which I don't even think is the best way. Like you said, is maybe with the next 3 expansions, they add 1 class with 3 elite specs per expansion, right? They do the
Mm-hmm.
heavy, the medium, the light, and just add 1 more to each one or something like that. But even as I say it, I'm like, yeah, it doesn't sound great
Right.
to me. Like you said, that you're knowing your class isn't probably not going to ever get more elite specs.
Yeah. Even though that wouldn't be the intended message sent, I feel like a
Right.
lot of players would probably read that as, oh, okay, so now this game, my class has reached the end of its line. This game is going to be reaching the end of its line to you're you're now basically sending signals that we're going to be shutting this down. You're just kind of tying it off with a nice bow or something. Like I think that might be the message that's sent if they don't continue to iterate on classes, giving new elite specs. And so again, ArenaNet's kind of painting themselves into a corner here. Like, hey, fans are gonna want new elite specs. I really want new elite specs,
Yeah.
but you got to juggle like the work and time and resources put into that with what is the payoff, and what if you don't do that? What is that sending to the what message is that sending to the community? You know, and I'm
Well,
not a
let's
doomer, but some people will read it very negatively.
let's get into the uh, kind of nitty gritty about elite specs, right? Like, what is the importance of elite specs to Guild Wars, and is there a path forward without elite specs that could satisfy the player base? I'll kind of go first, and I just want to talk about how important they are. I know they, from the way you spoke about it, ever since we did the last video on the announcement, you're really invested in elite specs. Now, for me, I am not. And you kind of brought it up earlier when you said balance nightmare,
Yeah.
right? I'm a PvPer. PvPers want things to be balanced, right? I
Yeah.
want my class that I play to be able to perform, especially someone who plays a main. I don't
Hmm.
multi-class a ton in PvP. And so, in my view, elite specs really from the get-go have just introduced so much power creep that I almost it's still probably a net positive, having elite specs, but I still think there's a lot of downsides that
Mm-hmm.
elite specs have brought to the game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, from a competitive standpoint. Now, if you're just playing open world and
You want to
it,
change a pace or something
yeah,
like
it's
that.
not a
Yeah,
big elite specs
it's a
aren't a big
positive.
deal, right?
Yeah.
Because open world, the whole nature of it is you play the way you want to play, right? So
Right.
if you're not playing the most optimized class, who cares? Like it's not
Right.
that big of a deal.
Right.
But if you want to PvP, if you want to raid, if you want to do strike CMs, fractal, really push fractals, then the
There's a
story
minimum
changes.
threshold of viability that your class, your elite spec needs to have, and I'd say like that's most evident in PvP because you can you can raid with pretty much anything
Hmm.
because the balance may not be there, and hey, going through a LFG to with a new raiding group, someone's probably going to carry it. Now they can't like solo carry it, but they can explain the mechanics. As long as you can function through the mechanics, a lot of the raids that I've done are doable with those OP classes,
Yeah.
even if you like to play the non-OP class.
Well, before we get into some alternatives, like where you want a scale of 1 to 10, like I don't think you would quit Guild Wars 2 if there's no elite specs or anything like
Yeah,
that. But what would be your level of disappointment if there's no new elite specs coming?
I guess I'd it would kind of depend on I guess if I think about breaking the elite spec down into like three components, like each elite spec gets a new weapon, gets a new trait, and gets new skills, like a new set of utility skills. I feel like if
And when you say
the
new trait, you mean like a new mechanic? Is that what
like
you
a
mean?
like the elite spec like
Mm-hmm.
trait line, like the
Okay.
wheelbender spec trait
Right.
line, that
But it
that kind
also
of
comes
and
with a new mechanic, right? Like a new.
right, yeah, some new mechanic
Yeah.
that's tied into that thing.
Sure.
Hey, you get
Sure.
access
Okay.
to whatever the flavor spin they want to put on your class
Right.
mechanic.
Right.
I would actually say that even if they decided, hey, this elite spec notion, this what we've pushed and how we've developed these things in the past is not viable, but we still want to give, they did say they wanted to give new ways to play or new exciting mechanics and things like class mechanics, I think. If
Some
they
kind of like combat mechanics or something. It was very
Yeah,
vague, but
yeah,
yeah.
if it was basically if that boiled out to um, there were new weapons available to classes, like they've done in the past. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
hey, the thief gets a rifle now when he becomes a Deadeye. If you're able to weapon swap to a new weapon type and you get like new utility skills, like a new set of utility skills, I think you could do away with the trait line that is specific to that class, that elite spec, and the kind of adjustment to the class mechanic. And I'd be fine with that because it's still a new way to play with that character
Right.
class because you get the new weapon, you get the new skills, but you don't have to worry about like, all right, so how is this going to synergize with my other stuff, and what do I have to take off in order to do this new thing? Of course, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's the worst of all scenarios because now I can spec for a Deadeye, but now I can run Great Sword Deadeye or something ridiculous like that. I
Right.
don't know.
I think you started in the right place. So let's talk about weapons a little bit. I think adding weapons is actually a really viable way to expand our combat experience without giving elite specs. Um, I think, however, as you kind of alluded to, I don't think you can add a new weapon without adding a new trait line,
Hmm.
right? Because then unless you're going to squeeze it into current trait lines and give some synergies with that weapon, like they do
Right.
whenever they add the elite specs, like, what was it? Soul Beast getting like daggers, and you have some dagger traits that really
Right.
synergized
Synergize in that trait line. Yeah.
100%. So yes, I'm totally excited about new weapons. I think that just adds a bunch of flavor to the game. And I think people always have kind of mentioned this from the beginning of Guild Wars. And I think it was just a convenient way with a new elite spec to add that new weapon. So let's just let's take the discussion here because I think it's going to get here eventually. What do you think about adding new trait lines that aren't tied to an elite spec? So, for example, I'll just give you an example of maybe something I would want to see. So, I play Longbow Ranger. So, what if there was a new core trait line introduced that would push that fantasy even more and make me like a sharpshooter? Or all the Rangers forever have always said, we want a rifle. So they add a rifle trait line. You get a rifle, and now you're a sharpshooter or
Mm-hmm.
something. You don't have to call it something new. It almost just like expands the base game, the core builds even. Um, I
So are
don't know.
you? Let me make sure that because I want to
Yeah,
make
go
sure
go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
am understanding this right.
Yep.
So you're suggesting or proposing like a fourth trait line to the standard three, or something like so that you don't have to do that awkward
Right.
pick and choose.
Right.
Hey, I can't for my third trait
Hmm.
line, my elite spec. Do I have to go as either
Right.
dragon hunter or will bender? But now, if I have just a special like a weapon specialization fourth trait line,
Yeah.
that might if that's what you're proposing, that might be a really cool way to have those added weapon sets in there without it being like a whole new can of worms from an elite spec and having to rebalance and all that. If
I
that's what you mean, I
am.
think that's a good way
I
to
am
approach it.
not opposed to a fourth trait line. I think that could be cool if done right. I think if you did a fourth trait line, I think you would. What I would do is it would lock you to 4 core trait lines. You couldn't run an elite spec to
Mm,
increase, help bring up the level of the core specs to the elite specs, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. That's just off the top of my head. But even what I'm saying is you don't even have to do a fourth necessarily. You could just add a rifle trait line that you could mix in with, say you want to be a soul beast with a rifle.
Hmm.
As long as that takes up one of your 3. But a
So
fourth could be interesting if it was just core, I think, because I think it would be way overpowered if you got a 4 trait line and an elite spec kind of a
yeah.
thing.
So what if it was like I'm playing a ranger, and instead of the um, marksmanship trait line, that's the name of
Hmm.
it, right? I'm the one
Yeah,
that gives
yeah.
you all the
Yep.
bonuses to like swift
Right.
arrow, and so instead of that being your trait line, it's
Hmm.
something else that gives you access to the say rifle, and it has similar traits or something that is like focused on making your rifle a really good play style option. Like
Yeah.
so then basically yeah, you could do it either way, I think, of adding in new trait lines that don't have to be swapped out with your elite spec. Just make sure that they are, not giving you this brand new playstyle experience, or adding in the fourth trait line, and like you said, kind of balancing that with, hey, but that means you are doubling down on like the core class
Yes.
and
Yeah.
getting that, like, what is the root of this class kind of meant to be before it specializes into the other ways. I think either of those would be viable options. Um,
Hmm.
it'd be interesting to see how, like, if ArenaNet was playing around with that kind of stuff, like what would their focus be? What would their um, goal be with that? Would they want to bring those core classes up, or no?
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time and resources making these elite specs, and they fit flavor wise in the world, and we want you playing those. Kind of get that feeling of like, yeah, I earned this. I did all these hero points and all that stuff. I don't know, like I think both of those would be really interesting ways to keep it fresh and
Mm.
also kind of make the expansion seem like it has more meat to it as far as like the classes are concerned.
Yeah, I was thinking of one thing that maybe wouldn't work because when you think of core classes, you think of free to play, right?
Yeah.
So if you're kind of adding things to the core, can you really make it an expansion feature? Like you get the other core, but here's a new core trait line, but you got to pay for this one. So I
Hmm.
don't know. I don't know. But the expansions aren't expensive. But I, I
And
like that idea. Go
here's the
ahead.
other thing too is
Yeah.
if you bought the first expansion, or let's say
Mm-hmm.
you skipped out on the first expansion, but then you came back to the game and you only bought the second expansion. Um, the way that ArenaNet has kind of done it in the past, and I don't know if this is going to be the case. This could be a totally different view of like how we think their business model is going to be later on. But with the new expansion, usually you got the previous expansion bundled in with it. So
Yes.
if they're going to have like these much more frequent mini expansions, do you just have to purchase a expansion from
Mm.
here on out to get access to say that fourth trait line
Mm.
or that weapon specialization swap thing? And then it's in perpetuity that you have that, or if you skipped out on the
Right.
first time because you didn't
Yeah.
care about that location, but you got the next expansion, now you get to get grandfathered in. Maybe that works. I don't know. I'm not a businessman.
Well, yes, you're right. That's above our pay grade. But we can see that Arena is trying to streamline all the
Yeah.
monetization. Like, that's why they're going to yearly. They're no more Living World. So I would assume I don't know if they're going to make all Living World free eventually, but maybe they'll add some. If you buy an expansion, you get Living World. I think that would be really a sweet deal
Hmm.
for some, to help sell the expansions. Maybe I don't know.
Right.
Um, so anyway, that's something I'm look. I would totally be. I would say I don't need an elite specialization if you just give me more trait lines and a new weapon that goes with that. So I would be totally happy with that.
Let me
Um,
let me circle back real quick to the
okay.
utility skills. Like, what about if you got this new? Maybe what if you didn't
Mm,
get a new trait line, but you
okay.
got just like, oh, here's some way that they can incorporate. You get a new weapon with the weapon skills that are associated with that, and also you get these utility skills. You
Mm,
go and you get trained, and you level up that utility, that class a little bit more, and so now you have access to sigils as a class that doesn't have sigils, or whatever it
yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Now you have again a new way to play, a new way to interact with the class that doesn't necessarily become this OP elite spec where, oh, now I got to run all of these specific utility skills because with my elite spec that's what's synergizing the most and that's what I have to run, like.
Yeah.
What about utility skills? What do you think?
Yes, of course. Give me more. And I've heard a lot of people in the community talk, maybe a little bit on tea time, but about some of the frustrations with utility skills where they're not really utility. Like some are so essential to like damage rotations,
Mm,
and they're just like secondary weapon skills in a way. Like that.
mm-hmm.
So I would even be open to a rework of the utility skills to make them actual utility, whether it's mobility or whether it's things that are more reactionary versus I have to push my utility skills in a row to make
Right.
sure I have alacrity uptime or I'm doing my full
Yeah.
damage or quickness instead of using my lightning reflexes to get out of the way or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or whatever kind of a thing. So at the base of it, yes, I would love new utilities. I think that's a very cool idea that could come with a weapon in a trait line. Just
Mm-hmm.
bundle them all as a package together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's super cool. What are your thoughts on elite, the state of elite or utility skills right now?
I I do I really like the new ways to play. I like the new utility skills that come in with the new trait line that you get for having an elite spec.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and it does sometimes feel bad when like I switch from, hey, I'm playing Spectre and then I'm gonna go do some open world roaming and I switch over to my Daredevil
And you
traits
lose
and
those.
and I lose those
Yeah.
things that I was just using
Right.
to plant down all these wells and get all this like healing and buff and alacrity. But then I have to realize, oh wait, no, this is a different playstyle. I'm doing a different thing now.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I do use them for utility um, when I'm, even if I'm open world roaming, I'm like, oh wait, I can't do that. That I just popped a skill that does nothing here.
Yeah.
Um, and so I I really like I want more ways to play, and I think the weapon sets are one thing that do that well. Utility skills are another thing that does that well.
Yeah.
I could forego the elite spec trait line because I think that that's going to be a lot of development time, and I think that really it makes
Mm.
the class feel fresh if you have new skills. I think that's what really
Mm.
makes it feel fresh, more so than the flavor of the elite spec and the new areas that the elite spec lets you play in. I think I could be wrong on this, but I feel like again as a multi-classer, um, the any any role that I might want to play is covered by every single class.
Yeah.
Like I think I'm meaning that like every class can play as a support, every class can play as a DPS, every class can play as kind of the tanky healer. Some classes do those roles better than others, but I think that is available to all classes. And so, in that sense, I can kind of see the reason why you don't need more elite specs, but I still want more ways to play these classes that I've enjoyed playing for years.
I'm gonna kind of throw a curveball at you here at the end,
Okay.
Brock. So here's what I would maybe love more than anything, and I think it would be a really cool selling point. So I have a specific play style. I like to play power builds
Hmm.
generally, right? Being a ranger, that obviously means I'm usually playing longbow greatsword, right? Or
Hmm.
that at
Hmm.
least is one of the, the most well-known power build.
Right.
And so, but I love the look and the style of dagger on Soul Beast.
Hmm.
But that's usually reserved for like a Condi build, right?
Hmm.
So here's what I think would be the coolest thing ever. What if they gave you multiple skills per weapon? For example, every weapon set had a set of Condi skills and a set of power skills. And you could either change the whole trait line, or they could even go more crazy and let you mix and match skills to drop into your weapon bar. I
Hmm.
would be, if I could play like a longbow dagger power ranger build,
Yeah.
like with maybe more mobility on the daggers versus the greatsword, and
Yeah.
something that synergizes with my, like an in and out play style, like a traditional rogue
Yeah.
kind of, or hunter. I think that would be cool. And even a step further, you could have a third trait for each that's like maybe a mobility or utility focused
Focus thing. Yeah.
version of that skill.
Right.
I
So it
don't
doesn't
know.
have to be like hey, the warrior hammer build is like your CCs and your knockdowns, but what if you could play a rifle warrior who had a bunch of knockdowns and CCs that that like that would be, I mean, I think that's a bad example. I think warrior rifle lets you do the headbutt thing anyway, and that's a stun, but
Right, right.
um
But
yeah,
just
I
let's
get what
just
you're
say
saying.
if you could do a power or a Condi version of each weapon, for example, like
Hmm.
think of Thief, for example. What would be cool, like maybe short bow, if you had a power version of the short bow that went along with your Condi version? Like,
Yeah, take a
does
little
that
bit of the
not
ranger piercing
excite you
arrows
or no?
thing, and yeah,
Yeah.
I think that would be really cool. It might um, it might intimidate people away from more of
Mm,
the
mm,
PvP scene, because then like
okay.
if you can't just tell at a glance from the little icon, okay, I'm playing against this bunker Condi build.
Right.
You'd have to have
Mm,
some, I mean, which is fine. You can do the little
yeah.
tiny, like Anet loves the little tiny visual cues that you have to know, what is this ticking, what is this
Yeah.
showing me, all that kind of stuff. And so like there's a way to do that, and that seems really interesting. That would be really cool, and it would fit in that statement of exciting new ways to play classes, new gameplay mechanics and things like that. So
Yeah,
I,
it does
I
add some complexity. I agree with you thinking about it. I mean, you're muddying the waters a little bit on what a build looks like, but Guild Wars is known for, hey, build diversity. This is what we
right,
do.
and it kind of goes to that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say founding principle, but the big, at least marketing statement where they planted their flag in the beginning 10 years ago was like there is no holy trinity. Like you can play, like every class gets to be healing and power
Right.
and tankiness and all that kind of stuff. So I think that does fit that mold, that viewpoint. That's a really
Hmm.
interesting one. I think I'd
Or
have to give it
let
some
me
more thought,
say,
but I like it.
let me frame it like this too. Maybe it's not just you get power or condi, but you have an ability that gives you access to quickness or alacrity, so you can change your build to provide a little bit of everything. Whatever your role needs to be filled, you
Hmm.
could change out your weapon skill. I don't know. Maybe
Hmm.
that's too complex too.
Yeah,
Maybe it
there
needs to be more simple.
there does reach a point in along that line of thinking where if all classes do all the same things, then like what's really the distinction between the mesmer giving me alacrity and the the guardian giving me alacrity if it's not function if it's just a matter of hey they picked this skill and I don't have a visual difference of it like it
But
seems like
isn't
that
isn't
kind of
that where elite specs are going anyway though? Like
it,
eventually everyone's gonna be able to do everything
that is
at some
the
point. But maybe
I
it's just a
think
cooler package to have it
that's
that way.
that's the friction of you want to have this game that has longevity and goes on in perpetuity, but it's at some point you've done everything, or like you're just reiterating the same things. Hey, let's make everybody a healer class. Uh,
Yeah.
that's gonna be a hard sell.
Yeah, so I think we've both agreed it looks grim for elite specs moving forward, just based on logistics, the time
Right.
it would take, to make, let alone one, to make 9 new
Yeah.
elite specs. You know, give me a new trait line, give me a new weapon, give me additional weapon skills for current weapons,
Hmm.
a fourth trait line. I don't know. I think I would be totally happy with any of these, and maybe it's even more of a balanced nightmare. I'm not 100% sure,
Yeah.
but maybe rework some things, rework the utilities to really be utility. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I don't know. Do you have any closing thoughts on?
I
Yes, it's
think
sad to see elite specs possibly go, but
I yeah
what else?
I would be I would be sad if elite specs were a thing of the past. If I knew that I was not getting any new way to play my thief. Um, but I think it would be. I think that there are still enough interesting ways that ArenaNet can make it interesting, and as long as they kind of over, as long as they over meet expectations, is that
Hmm.
if they're delivering something new, delivering something that I hadn't thought about, that we hadn't talked about, if they're giving it as like here, this is a new thing, and it actually comes off good,
Well, they've set
okay.
the expectations pretty low with the blog posts because
They
they didn't
have.
give us much. They didn't give us much. So
Yep.
maybe whatever it is, we'll be blown away, and
Yeah.
say, this is amazing. So yeah, I'm okay. Any of this stuff that we talked about today, I would be totally cool with. But Rock, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah.
Guys, if you like this style of video, give us a like, even subscribe. We're probably going to try to turn this into a series where we kind of break down all the different, things that they could bring us with these mini expansions that could get us excited, that could, probably just go through the blog posts, see what the things they did, fill in the gaps. And so today we wanted to go over classes and elite specs. And so I'm sure maybe races are around the corner, some other things that I think
New
we're both pretty
locations
excited
probably.
about. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so anyway, Thanks for joining us, guys. We'll catch you on the next one. See you.
See ya.